everybody, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest branch offering from the East Anglian branch of IIRSM. I am absolutely delighted to welcome Paul Robinson, Director of Robinson's Management Services Limited, who is going to talk to you about risk management linked to a Star Wars theme. This is particularly interesting because, as I understand it, May the 4th is Star Wars Day, and I never thought I would be saying this, but may the 4th be with you. But we are looking forward to this one because Paul is going to link this to his extensive experience that he's got with ISO management standards. And I can vouch for this, as he's actually in the past been my line manager. So without further ado, it's over to you, Paul, for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Star Wars presentation. As with all Star Wars films, we start a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And we'd like to take you into the world of Star Wars today. Our presentation today is called The Empire Gets Hacked. It is a time of great uncertainty for the Empire. A number of risks have materialized that have ultimately led to the destruction of the Death Star, with significant loss of life, financial impact, and great damage to the fearsome reputation of the Empire. It's fallen on the IIRSM to investigate the various contributing risk factors that led to the destruction of the Death Star. Today's presentation is called Risk Management Lessons Learned from the Destruction of the Death Star. So good afternoon and welcome to this special matinee presentation on Star Wars Day 2023. My name is Paul Robinson and I'm Director of Robinson Management Services. And as Tony mentioned, RMS specialises in the implementation and maintenance of ISO standards all across the galaxy. Today, we'll be using the Force where necessary to highlight the failures in risk management that led to the destruction of the Death Star. So sit back and strap in as we enter the world of Star Wars. We start our story with a chase scene. The Empire are desperately attempting to recover from an information security incident where a small band of determined cyber criminals known as the Rebel Alliance have stolen the plans to the Death Star. This is clearly a massive data breach and will impact the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information that the Empire is trying to protect. Realizing that the plans are about to be recovered, Princess Leia transfers them to a mobile storage device known as an R2 unit. Once again, the plans slip through the Empire's hands and are once again lost. Unfortunately, the plans are made public, leading to the Rebel Alliance gaining valuable information on the Death Star's vulnerabilities and weaknesses. Further to this, the plans are exploited for commercial gain, leading to the publication of a number of books and feature-length documentaries on the Rebels' exploits. So we need to talk about, in the first instance, physical security. If only the Empire's physical security team had been on the ball. They had ample opportunity to recover the plans from the escape pod that was jettisoned in the opening scenes. But indecision and poor decision making in the security office led to them allowing the escape pod to land safely on Tatooine. If they'd taken the opportunity to vaporize the escape pod, the Rebels would have failed and the entire Star Wars saga would have been a 15-minute film. Speaking of physical security, allowing a number of intruders to enter a secure room, wander freely around your space station, access your network and impersonate stormtroopers has to be seen to be pretty lax. So we wonder, could better security training for the Death Star security team have made a difference here? So we have a number of early failures. The Death Star plans were not encrypted or backed up. Intruders were allowed to impersonate Empire employees enter the premises, access secure networks, escape from a trash compactor, access the tractor beam power generator, switch off key security measures, and escape, pursued by a token number of the 7,000 TIE fighters allegedly stationed on the Death Star. It is a simple fact that the information security team on the Death Star had not sufficiently evaluated risks to the information that they held. So could ISO 27001 have helped here? An information security management system for the Death Star would have taken a risk-based approach to the protection of information and uses a number of best practice controls to help mitigate risks. These are contained in Annex A of the standard and its supporting guidance on their application in ISO 27002. The latest revision of ISO 27001 covers organisational, people, physical and technological controls that have all been exploited in this instance. So let's look at the potential scope of an ISO 27001 management system for the Death Star. A proposed scope of certification could be the information security management system for the protection of all information assets on the Death Star. And in looking at its applicability, it would be applicable to all personnel, droids, other life forms, and is applicable to all activities undertaken on the Death Star, including flying, administration, security facilities, maintenance, and of course, planet killing. And in this instance, all home workers would be excluded from scope. Physical security audits can also help to uncover risks and weaknesses in security. ISO 20001 provides a number of controls in this area that can provide a useful basis for conducting physical security audits. So consider the security of your premises, any weaknesses that could allow unauthorized access to secure areas, and the use of monitoring, such as CCTV. The impact of the environment on your business can also have a dramatic effect. For example, fire and flooding, as well as where you place your key infrastructure equipment. For example, would you place your servers under the water tank? Increasingly, remote working is prevalent. This can also increase risks to assets, such as IT equipment that is taken off-site. Finally, secure wiping and destruction of IT equipment is also essential in order to prevent data and information leakage. We have to ask questions of the Imperial leadership. It's fair to say that leadership style of Darth Vader is somewhat dictatorial in its nature. Junior officers are seen to be bickering amongst themselves in the film and live in constant fear of the Empire's shady management team. And the Empire's management team themselves are overconfident in their own abilities. They think they have the best weapon in the galaxy and have a risk appetite so great that the possibility of the Death Star being destroyed is unthinkable to them. It's also fair to say that the first rule of good management is not to use threatening behaviour or physical abuse to ensure you win your argument. ISO 45003 encourages us to consider psychosocial risks, including those relating to the organisation of work, the working environment, and social factors, including relationships, leadership culture, violence at work, harassment, bullying, and victimisation. Could the adoption of ISO 45003 have avoided some of the leadership challenges that are clearly present on the Death Star? Leadership and commitment is critical to establishing a robust risk management framework. As identified in ISO 31000, management commitment is central to ensuring the design, implementation, evaluation, improvement, and integration of risk management across all functions within an organisation, regardless of which galaxy you might be in. We need to talk about stormtroopers, not the sharpest tools in the box, and they are prone to the occasional mistake. We all know that stormtroopers can't hit a barn door at 10 paces, but could a lack of competency have also played a part in the Death Star's demise? The HSE defined competency as the combination of training, skills, experience, and knowledge that a person has, and their ability to apply them to perform a task safely. Stormtroopers failed to apply sufficient training or skills to identify the droids on Tatooine, despite having an accurate description for them and a trail of footprints. Yes, these are actually the droids you're looking for. Another opportunity lost to recover the plans and prevent them from falling into rebel hands. The Empire gives scant regard to the environment. This was made apparent with the destruction of Alderaan, which caused significant environmental impact and damage, not to mention the elimination of all its inhabitants. Consideration of their impact on the environment through adoption of ISO 14001 would have identified the significant environmental aspects and their impacts arising from the Death Star's activities under normal, abnormal, and also emergency conditions. Focus on the reduction of those environmental aspects deemed insignificant can help to enhance your environmental performance and reduce wasted or underutilized resources. And we can see here the Death Star's environmental aspects are emissions to air, releases to land, releases to water, energy use, energy emitted, the use of natural resources, waste and byproducts, and use of space. As energy consumed and emitted is likely to be the Death Star's most significant environmental aspect, it might be worth considering the implementation of ISO 50001, which considers energy consumption, use, and also efficiency. An energy assessment would also help to determine if any operational efficiencies, such as turning down the thermostat on the Death Star and closing the hangar doors, might help to save energy and cost for the Empire. Further evidence of poor environmental practices can be seen with the mixing and contamination of waste streams in the trash compactor scene. In The Empire Strikes Back, this waste is simply ejected into space, a serious case of fly tipping. Application of the waste hierarchy would help to manage these waste streams and help to eliminate waste in all its forms. Let's move on to occupational health and safety on the Death Star. Apart from it being a very blurry picture, can anyone see what's wrong in this picture? One false move by Obi-Wan Kenobi will lead to certain death, while the stormtroopers stationed on the door could also benefit from guardrails to prevent a fall from height into the void of space. It's clear that risks were not considered and safety was not factored into the design of the Death Star. Possibly a failure of the principal designer during the planning and design phase, or maybe the UK CDM regulations just didn't apply in space. And as for open doors in front of voids, the less said the better really in regards to this short video here. It's a little known fact that in this iconic scene from Star Wars, the actors undertook this stunt themselves. In tapes from 1978 that were later found and released, Carrie Fisher recounted that the scene was completed in one take and that she was attached to Mark Hamill's harness with a hook that she feared would snap. It's clear that the safety and well-being of the actors was a secondary consideration in the 1970s, and it's encouraging to think that we've made some progress in this area. As Carrie Fisher said, they put all these boxes down and I couldn't see how these boxes were going to prevent me from breaking many bones. But if one fell, we both fall. I could see both Mark Hamill and I on insurance for the rest of our lives. And it's clear from the look on her face in this picture that she was absolutely terrified as to what was going on in this scene. has been discovered via a trawl of the internet that the Empire does actually have a health and safety office. Deep in the bowels of the Death Star, a plucky band of health and safety specialists work diligently to undertake safety inspections and produce regular reports that are shared with senior management. However, nothing happens. Does this sound familiar to you? This really reinforces the poor management attitudes to health and safety from the top down. And it's fair to say that the poor safety culture leads right back to Darth. One step backwards by any of these stormtroopers could lead to a significant amount of form filling for the health and safety team. Some good practices have been observed. There is a prevalence of PPE all around the Death Star. Even turbo laser operatives are required to wear massive helmets. Once again, though, we see poor application of the hierarchy of risk controls. PPE should be the last control and is considered to be the least effective form of control. The Empire needs to revisit their risk assessments with a view to eliminating hazards at source, rather than just getting another stormtrooper to replace the one that just fell down the open lift shaft. As risk professionals, we recognise that hazards and risks exist, and they are all around us. We know that risk assessment is an inexact science. Sometimes we have to use the force to evaluate the likelihood of something terrible happening, balanced against the consequences if the hazard is realised. In an article by the University of Arizona, which is summarised here, it's clear that the risk of a successful attack on the Death Star was considered highly unlikely, but the consequences of a photon torpedo down the thermal exhaust port could be severe. We have to ask ourselves what actions could and should have been taken to reduce the consequences, and why were they not implemented? Meanwhile, back on Earth, we see a real-life case that involved Harrison Ford during the making of The Force Awakens. The production company behind Star Wars The Force Awakens was successfully prosecuted over the incident in which Harrison Ford broke his left leg. Following the incident, Ford was airlifted to hospital for surgery, presumably not in the Millennium Falcon. Following an investigation, the HSE said it believed there was sufficient evidence about the incident which left Ford with serious injuries to bring 4 charges relating to alleged health and safety breaches. An HSE spokesman added, by law, employers must take reasonable steps to protect workers. This is true on a film set as a factory floor. And ultimately, the British firm owned by Disney was fined £1.6 million for the health and safety breaches. We need to talk about the Empire's lax response to threats. A sign of the Empire's overconfidence can be found in extracts of communications. Despite the Death Star being under sustained attack, there is a failure to take the threat seriously. When alerted to the fact that 30 rebel ships are attacking, the Empire only launched an initial wave of 6 TIE fighters. We have already established that over 7,000 fighters were stationed on the Death Star. Meanwhile, overconfidence and an ambivalent attitude to risk is again exposed when Governor Tarkin is advised to evacuate. Sadly, in the film, he didn't live to regret his decision. Boom. Coming back to our model for risk management, the principles required to ensure value creation and protection are enshrined in ISO 31000. These principles again need to be driven from top management to ensure involvement in all in developing a positive risk management culture. This ensures that your risk management system is integrated, is structured and comprehensive, is customized to suit your organization, is inclusive and includes all employees, is dynamic and able to change, and is based on the best available information. It's structured on human and cultural factors and is based on a culture of continual improvement. And only then you will achieve value creation and protection from your risk management system. Once the framework is established, we can set about evaluating risk and undertaking risk treatment actions to ensure that the risks are mitigated down to the lowest possible impact, and wherever possible are not realised. These actions need to be supported through regular monitoring, review and communications and consultation to ultimately ensure that the wings don't fall off your risk management framework. So we have some likely root causes. These include incomplete project requirements. The Death Star was a formidable weapon, but the Empire failed to design out its vulnerabilities and weaknesses. We've got a failure to recognise risk, which led to the rebels being able to plant a torpedo into an open exhaust port. We've got a failure to manage risk, which led to the rebels being able to expose a known vulnerability. We've got poor leadership. We've explored this in some detail, and it's fair to say that no one likes to work under a dictatorial bully who doesn't encourage collaboration. And finally, the Death Star was a formidable weapon, but could better trained stormtroopers have been better utilised to keep the peace on planets rather than simply blowing them up? So the risks materialised. The rebels successfully stole the plans, identified a vulnerability, and fired a photon torpedo down the Death Star's thermal exhaust port, the consequences of which were catastrophic. According to reports at the time, the Death Star 1 was said to have had a crew of 1,148,309 people on board at the time of its demise. So, did the Empire learn from this calamitous event? Let's find out. In all ISO standards, it's recognised that sometimes bad things happen. They're known as non-conformities. How we react to non-conformities is critical to ensuring that they don't happen again. Immediate actions should be taken to prevent situations from becoming worse. Only then should an investigation commence to determine likely root causes. Corrective actions should focus on eliminating the root causes, which can include lack of competency, failure to follow processes, lack of resources, or simply the process was wrong in the first place. Corrective actions should always be verified to ensure their effectiveness and to avoid sticking plaster solutions. And remember to stay on target and always aim to eliminate the root causes. Only then will you become a Jedi Knight in risk management. So, what went wrong the second time the Death Star blew up? Well, after the destruction of the first Death Star, the Emperor decided to get involved and made many of the same mistakes that took place in the first explosion. The push from the Emperor to accelerate reconstruction led to mistakes, sloppy work, and missed deadlines. Without Endor's protective shield, the Death Star 2 was always going to be easy pickings for the rebels. And after such a massive loss of personnel in the first explosion, there was simply not sufficient resources available to rebuild the Death Star in a reasonable time frame. By force choking anyone who disagreed with him, Vader continued to lead by fear and intimidation. He contributed to the lack of continuity in leadership at lower levels. And Vader was also distracted by Luke Skywalker. His obsession led him to ultimately take his eye off the ball, with disastrous consequences. So ultimately, what happened? Well, boom again. I'd like to thank Tony Hayward and the committee of the IIRSM East Anglia branch for the opportunity to present to you today. and I hope you enjoyed the presentation as much as I enjoyed making it. I hope amongst the fun of today's presentation you took away some serious points and are able to apply them in your workplace, whether that be in your premises or in a galaxy far, far away. And now we have some time available for questions.
Hi, Tony.
Hi, Julie.
Yeah, I didn't know whether we'd lost you. Thank you so much, Paul. Tony, do you have any questions for Paul? I don't have any questions yet, but I've just asked the audience to pop them in the questions box if they do.
Yeah, I have one question. I also have a comment. The comment has come from the East Anglian Branch Committee from Justin. I'm loving this already, so that's some excellent feedback. What I would say, Paul, I mean, obviously, you've got excellent knowledge of the different standards and you've applied them accordingly around the Star Wars based theme. But one thing for me, because it's been prevalent in the news just lately, you spoke at the outset about cybersecurity. If there was one step that we were to take to try and mitigate cybercrime, shall we say, or cybersecurity, what would you recommend? What would that be and why?
At a very simplistic level, I'd say three things. Look at your users, look at who has access to your systems, and ensure that only those who have sufficient permissions to access those systems have access to them. Anybody else doesn't need access. So you could consider their role-based access considerations and undertaking regular access reviews to ensure that only those with sufficient permission have access to those systems. The other thing that's prevalent in the world these days is ransomware and cyber attacks. And again, at a very simplistic level, ensure that you back up your information and also ensure that that information is encrypted. Because if the bad guys can get to your backups and that information isn't encrypted, you've got a serious problem if you've got a ransomware situation or cyber crime situation. So those are three simple rules that any organization can implement and very simple controls that can help to protect information. And again, in the situation of Star Wars, that would have made the whole film a much shorter episode. If they'd got a backup of the Death Star plans, if those plans had been encrypted, and the relevant people had access to those plans, problem solved. The rebels would have never got in.
And a second point, if I may ask you, and of course, from my own personal point of view, in the day it evolved around BS 5750 that later went to ISO 9001, etc., etc., which of course most listeners will be familiar with. But you mentioned a number of standards in your presentation, and each of those standards, again, my personal opinion, seem to have their place in society, as you quite rightly said, to assist in mitigating risk and continual process improvement. But the question I'm asking, I suppose, is with the plethora of standards that are out there at the moment, going back to your Star Wars thing, if there was one that ultimately, not resulted in the destruction of the Death Star, shall we say, would there be one of those standards that you would single out to implement from your, years of experience in the consultancy business?
That is a great question. I would fall back on the fact that 9001 as a basis for establishing the management system is used by many organisations. Most organisations have either a product or deliver a service. So in that instance, 9001 is relevant. Even, for example, in the charity sector, there is a service there that's being provided. So I've seen 9001 being applied by pretty much any organisation in any environment. And of course, that provides that structure and framework then to potentially then integrate other standards. What I would say there, though, in deciding which standards to implement is to think about what it is you're trying to protect. And again, take that risk-based approach, which all the ISO standards take. So in this situation, data protection, information security, if that's key to you and your activities, products, services involve a lot of manipulation of data and the protection of information, then 27001 could be the standard for you. But what I would encourage all organisations to do is look at across a range of standards and possibly, even if you don't go for certification, maybe cherry pick the best bits of the other standards that you can apply, which will always help to potentially, for example, reduce environmental risk, protect the health and safety of your employees, protect assets, for example, with ISO 55001, or consider, for example, energy management with ISO 50001. So if all of those things are relevant to your organisation, there could be aspects of ISO standards that you could implement anyway, ultimately without going for certification, which will help manage risk, drive improvement, and reduce cost.
Okay, thank you for that, Paul. Is there any other questions, Julie?
Yes, there is. We've had a couple of questions in now. So the first question is from Jason. Don't have a question, but would like to say thank you for your presentation. Clearly a lot of thought and effort went into that. May the 4th be with you. I had to think then what the initials meant for. And then we've got one from Justin, which is with regards to cloud-based storage, and then in brackets, which a lot of companies now use for cost and space reasons, close brackets. Do you see these as a too high risk profile, given that there seems to be more attacks on these?
Great question. Yes, and that's actually something that's been introduced in the latest version of ISO 27001 in the 2022 revision, and the controls that are contained in that revision. It introduces considerations around cloud providers, and there's also ISO standards in that area as well that can be applied. But what that comes back to, I think, in my view, is having a clear process and robust process for evaluating suppliers. So if you're going out to a cloud service provider, you might want to satisfy yourselves that they've considered risks and threats to the information that they're holding on your behalf, and again consider who has access to that information. Regardless of where it is in the world or universe, it's going to be on the cloud somewhere in a location, and again, we need to consider backdoors to that information, and the protection that's in place, and ensuring that you've got, again, robust backups, that those backups are encrypted, that information is possibly encrypted at rest, and any information in transit is also encrypted as well. So do your due diligence on your suppliers before you enter into contract with them, and ensure that they've got robust controls in place, possibly through the use of ISO 27001. But again, there are other supporting standards as well for cloud service providers that can be relevant there as well.
Great, thank you for that. There aren't any more questions, so I'd like to say a huge thank you to you for giving up your valuable time for not only presenting today, but all the effort that went into putting this presentation together. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today, and just to let you know, the recording will be on the IIRSM YouTube channel, probably. Oh, I've got another question now, hang on. Let's just see if you can take this question first before I finish. Would you take the Empire on as a client?
Good question. If they came to me sincerely and really recognised that they needed a management system, yeah, I might be tempted, to be honest. But there need to be some culture change in that organisation, definitely, for me to consider it, I think.
Yeah, I could not
question.
ask you that question. Okay, so the YouTube channel will be uploaded probably next week now, as I don't work on Fridays. So I'd like to wish everyone a good evening, and I suppose I should say, may the 4th be with you. Goodbye, everyone.
Just before we go, Julie.
Yeah.
Oh, we gone?
No, we're still here.
No, still here, Tony.
Oh, excellent. Just before we go, if I can just say, obviously just want to give a reminder that we're now 2 weeks away from the IIRSM Risk Excellence Awards 2023 in Church House, Westminster. I hope to see as many of you there as possible because I'll be in attendance. The IIRSM had a record number of applications this year, so that's good, and that looks as though that's going to be a really good evening. Likewise, if you continue looking at the East Anglian branch webpage, we have got further events planned for later in the year. So if you keep an eye open on our website, they will obviously be advertised accordingly, both on there and on LinkedIn. And likewise, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Paul for giving up his time this afternoon and giving us a real insight, not only into Star Wars, but also a number of different international standards. So thank you very much indeed, Paul.
Thank you, Tony, and
Thank
may
you.
the 4th be with you.